Yeah, hi guys, good morning. And in today's session, we'll talk about namespaces in Kubernetes, okay, and how can we restrict the specific CPU limits as well as memory limits to the namespaces as well, okay, and what are the benefits with the help of namespaces, okay. So let me share my screen. Yeah, hope you guys can see my screen. Yes, right. Okay. So this is my master machine, okay, and if I'll do kubectl get nodes, then we can see one master is ready and two worker nodes are up and running. Okay, so let me check if we have any pods which are running. kubectl get pods. The one pod is running, so let me delete this. kubectl delete pod -f1 all. Okay, let me check if there are any replica sets. kubectl get first. Let me check the deployments. Okay, no deployments. Replica sets, no replica sets, replica controllers, no replica controllers, okay. And then kubectl get services. Okay, that's the default service which is running. So we don't have anything in our cluster as of now. Okay. Now we have a topic called namespace. Okay. So what is namespace? If you check this kubectl API for resources type grep namespaces. Okay, so this is our namespace, and we can also call our namespace with shortcut called ns. Okay, and the version of API is v1. Okay, so if you want to get the complete objects with the short names as well, right, so we can use kubectl API services. Okay, then you will get the complete details. Okay, for example, config maps, we can call it as cm as well. Okay, so this is also one of the way how we can get the complete resources, API versions, what is the name, and what can be the shortcut as well. Okay, so for namespaces, if I'll scroll down, namespaces, I mean, yeah, namespaces, we can call it as ns as well. Okay, so now let me check if there are any default namespaces available. Okay, so kubectl get ns. Okay, the moment I have executed kubectl get ns, here we can see a set of namespaces which has been already available in my Kubernetes cluster. Okay, I haven't created this, but it has been created at the point of installation only. Okay, so we can see four different namespaces. This is kube system, kube public, kube node lease, and kube flannel and default. Okay, so what are namespaces? Any idea where do we use namespaces and what are the benefits with the help of namespaces?
Multiple users.
Multiple users or multiple teams can also work on different namespaces. So what will happen is, so this is our Kubernetes cluster, right? So we have one master, kubectl get nodes. So this is, sorry, kubectl get node. So this is our Kubernetes cluster, and this cluster can be used between different teams in one project. Okay, in one organization, same cluster can be used by different teams. So in that case, what will happen? So if everyone is trying to create the namespaces, then what will happen? It will be created in the default namespace only. Okay, so we can create different namespace for each team, and their applications will be allocated into that namespaces. Okay, so basically namespaces are helpful for us to create different sections of our cluster. Okay, for different teams. Okay, so if you see, this namespace provide a way to divide a cluster into virtual partitions or segments. For example, okay, and also they act as logical boundary that isolates and separates resources within a cluster. Means namespaces will act as a boundary. For example, one project they are trying to create one deployment and one replica sets and some pods and some services. Okay, and that will be restricted to that particular namespace only. Okay, so what will happen with the help of this? We can separate our cluster into multiple partitions again. Okay, for example, we have one. I mean, if suppose we are working for any company, right? So in that company, we can see different teams who are working, and we can also find development team, operations team, testing team, HR department, okay, and other departments as well. So what they will do, generally they will separate different cabins. Okay, HR department, they can sit in this cabin. Operations team, they can sit at these logical cubes, I mean a separate partition. So what is happening, one floor they are segregating into different partitions. The same way namespaces will also work in our Kubernetes cluster. So namespace is generally used to divide our cluster into different partitions. Okay, now namespaces helps organize and manage applications and services running in the cluster. So whatever services we are trying to create, that will be dedicated to that namespace only. Okay, so we'll see how we can create namespace and how we can create a specific pod into that namespace. Okay, so by default, the pod that we have created will be created in default namespaces. Means we are using namespaces from day one, but we were not aware of that. Okay, for example, if you see this kubectl get pods, here if you see this message, no resources found in default namespace, means the moment I am trying to check the list of pods, it is trying to get the details from default namespace. So this is our default namespace. Okay, for example, now let me try to create one pod. Okay, let's, so we have one, let me check our YAML file first.yaml. Okay, so let me create this third pod. Okay, so what will happen, for example, kubectl create f1f. The file name is first.yaml. Okay, third pod has been created. So now where this pod has been created, where this pod has been created, so this is created inside the default namespace. Okay, if you see this kubectl describe ns namespace default. Okay, so okay, basically here we are unable to see the details of the pod, but let me describe pod. Okay, kubectl describe pod and then the pod type. Pod name was third pod, I guess, right? So THIRD POD. Okay, and if I'll scroll up, let me check where is the default namespace. Okay, here if you see, this pod has been scheduled in the namespace called default. Because we haven't mentioned anything, if suppose I am mentioning any namespace, then what will happen, that will be created inside the namespace. Okay, now let us see how can we create one namespace from imperative commands. Okay, so kubectl create ns means namespace. I can use ns or I can use namespaces, spelling namespace. Okay, and then the name of the namespace what I want to create is test. Hit enter. So what happened, namespace test has been created. So if I'll do kubectl get ns, then I can see test has been created 7 seconds ago. So let me describe this kubectl describe test, sorry, describe namespace test. Okay, so here we can see the details of our namespace, and here we are able to see something called no resource quota, no limit range resource. Okay, so what is this, we'll talk about this after some time, but before this let us see, I mean, this is how we can create our namespace. Now, so generally what will happen, for example, kubectl get pods. Okay, here we can see one pod is running already, right? So if I'm trying to create one more pod again, so what will happen, kubectl by using create command -f third pod. So what will happen, third pod, sorry, YAML file name, right? So first.yaml. So what will happen? Third pod already exists because in one namespace only one pod can be created. So if we have multiple namespaces now, what will happen? -n text. So I'm telling that to create one pod by using first.yaml in the namespace called test. And if I'll hit enter, see third pod has been created. So what we have did with the help of namespaces, we can create same pods. I mean the name of the pod can be same, but that should be in different namespaces. Okay, so that is possible. We can create same pods with the same name, but that should be in different namespaces. Okay, so this case, when we can see this, for example, multiple application team or testing team, they are trying to map the same pod name. Okay, so in this case, that can be easily achieved with the help of namespaces. Okay, now if you want to get the list of pods which are running in your test namespaces, so what we can do, kubectl get pods -n test. So we need to specify which namespace you want to use. And if I hit enter, then we can see one third pod has been running in the default namespace. Okay, for example, if you want to describe this, kubectl describe pod third pod -n test. Basically, I want to describe the pod which is available in the namespace called test. Hit enter. Then if you scroll up, then here we can see the namespace as test. Okay, so this is how we can create one namespace and we can create our pod inside that namespace. Okay, now if suppose I'm trying to execute delete command, okay, so kubectl get delete pod -l. So what will happen? This is getting deleted, but from where it is getting deleted? Pod has been deleted, but from where? Any idea? Any guesses?
From default.
Yeah, from default, because I haven't specified the namespace name. So if I'll do kubectl get pod, then we can see the default namespace pods which are currently 0. Okay, if you want to delete the pod from specific namespace, then you need to specify -n and test. Then it will delete the pod which was available in the namespace called test. Okay, if you want to check the list, -n test. Okay, so this is how we can create namespace, we can delete, we can try to get the details. Okay, yes, if you have any questions, let me know. Okay, okay, so for example, I don't want my namespace to be, I mean, I don't want to specify each and every time. For example, I don't want to specify -n test. I don't want to specify this each and every time. So I want to make my test namespace as my default one. In this case, we can use this. Okay, we can use kubectl config set -context -current -namespace equal to test. So if I'll hit enter, here we can see there some changes has been modified. Okay, now if I'm trying to create my kubectl create -f first.yaml, sorry, so let us see what is happening. So by default it will assume everything into the test namespace. Okay, now if I'll try to describe this, kubectl describe pod and then the pod name, and if I scroll up, then we can see the default namespace has been test, because we have configured the namespace as test should be the default namespace which should be used by Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so this is how we can make our current namespace as our default if you don't want to pass -n and then the namespace name each and every time. Okay, so now let me modify it to default only. So before this, let me delete this. Okay, so kubectl delete pod -all. Okay, deleted. Now let me switch it back to default only because I don't want to mess with the default configurations. Okay. Okay, done. Now our namespace, I mean the default namespace will be default only. Okay. Now if you'll see this kubectl get ns, so we have different namespaces here. For example, if you want to delete this namespace test, what we can do? kubectl delete namespace and namespace name. Delete it. So once we have deleted the namespace, so whatever was available inside the namespace like pods, deployments, replica sets, replica controllers, config maps, each and everything will get deleted. Okay. So whatever we have created inside the namespaces, everything will get deleted if you are deleting the namespace. Okay. Now, if I do get ns, then we can see 4 default namespaces are available. Default was this we have seen, right? So this will get created and we can whatever pods or services we are creating, that will be inside the default namespaces. Okay. So and then we have something called kube flannel, kube node list, kube public, and kube system. So what is this? Why are we using these different namespaces? So what is the benefit of these namespaces? Okay. So let us see that I have documented it as well. So before that, so let me do one thing. Let me create one pod from declarative object configuration. Okay. So this is our YAML. So the only thing what I will be changing is here I will be specifying the namespace colon test. Okay. Inside the metadata, I will specify the namespace as test. So let me copy this. vi and then first dot YAML. Okay, here after name I will specify the namespace. Okay, test. So this by default you no need to specify any namespace name over there because we have already specified that in our YAML file, right? So namespace. So this will create our pod inside the namespace called test. Okay. Now if I'm trying to create kubectl create -f and then first.ml, what will happen? Will this get created or it will throw error? It will throw error because there is no namespace called test because I have deleted that namespace just now, right? So let me create namespace first, kubectl create ns test, and then let me try to execute my YAML file. And now if I try to describe this, kubectl describe pod, or else if I try to do this, kubectl get pods. This is from default, no pods are available. And -n test, here we can see third pod is available in the namespace called test. Okay, so this is how we can declare our namespace name inside our YAML file. Okay, now let me delete my namespace. kubectl delete ns test. So namespace has been deleted. So all the pods and everything will get deleted inside this namespace. Okay, this is done. So once we are deleting the namespace, it will also delete the objects which were available inside the namespace. Okay. Now we have seen the default namespaces, right? So default, this is something where it will create, I mean, any object, whatever object we are trying to create, whether it is pods, services, deployments, replica controllers, replica sets, config map, secrets, that will get created inside our namespace. I mean, inside our default namespace. Okay. So now we have kube node list. Recently, few of the people were seeing issues like, I mean, Satish was seeing the issue and Jagan was also facing the issue, right? So what was happening? So we have some namespace called kube node list. Here, if you see this, kubectl get ns. We have something called kube node list. So what do you mean by kube node list? So why this namespace is required for us? Node means basically, what do you mean by node?
In the cluster, whatever we have machines before us.
Node basically that can be our virtual machine or EC2. Okay, lease in normal general terms, what we call that lease. lease is a kind of agreement, I can say. Okay, so what will happen is each and every time, I mean, node lease is a mechanism for worker nodes to master about their health status, and they are ready to take workloads. Basically, because of node lease mechanism only, master is able to get the information that we have two healthy worker nodes, and if the based upon their health status only, the master will assign the work to the node machines. Okay, so lease should be sent for every 60 seconds. If lease is not renewed, then master may be considered nodes and unhealthy or unresponsive. Means, so what will happening, for every 60 seconds worker nodes are sending one lease to the master machine that we are still alive and about the health status. So once the master will get the health report, then it will assume that okay, these nodes are healthy and we can assign the work. So that's how it is getting scheduled. Okay, so and this lease is sent for every 60 seconds. If it is not for sent for every 60 seconds, what will happen? Master will wait for some more time and then it will make the node as the status as not available or some XYZ status. Okay, so this is how we are able to get the information of the nodes to the master because of cube node lease namespace. Okay, and then we have something called cube public. Public itself means accessible, I mean it is publicly accessible. So queue public namespace will serve as a central location for storing public resources that needs to be accessed by all users and service accounts within a Kubernetes cluster. Means, so whatever we are trying to access like our pods and our services, right? So that is something which will be stored in terms of queue public. Okay, and then we have one more thing called cube system. All the pods management related stuff to create clusters are stored in cube system. Okay, so each namespace has its own specifications with their purpose, what they are doing. Okay, so a cube system is something which will help us to store all the management related stuff, I mean the details of the pods, I can say, or else we can say as the information. Okay, so which out of what we can create the clusters. Okay, so these are the different namespaces which are available, and Flannel is something related to your networking part because we have installed Flannel networking solution, right, to assign the IPs to our pods. Okay, so now, but out of this, these are something related to the system, I mean to the Kubernetes cluster. The only thing what we are maintaining is either default or your custom namespace. Okay, now we have some, I mean, even when we are using deployments, right? So what are the benefits with the help of namespaces in deployments? So as we have discussed, if multiple teams are working on deployments, then we can create multiple namespaces for that project. Means within one cluster, we can create different namespaces. For example, for testing environment, I can create one namespace. For development environment, I can create one namespace. For production environment, I can create one namespace. Okay, so multiple environments apps can be deployed in different namespaces. So this is what we have seen just now. I mean, third part we have created in default namespace as well as in the test namespace. Means same pod name with the same name we were able to create in two different namespaces. So same application we can deploy in multiple namespaces. Okay, so we can restrict the number of objects to be created in namespaces. Means we can restrict how many pods you want to create inside these namespaces. We haven't seen this yet, so I will be explaining this, but make sure to remember that we can also restrict only two pods can be created into the specific namespace. We can do that. Okay, so we can also provide limits to our namespaces. I mean, in last session what we have did, we have seen the limits to our pods, right? So similarly, we can also limit to our namespaces. Means by default, if I'm configuring that this namespace should have at least 1 GB of RAM and 1 core of CPU. So what will happen? Any pod which is getting created inside this namespace will be attached with the same resource limit. Okay, so in previous session we were individually assigning the requests, right? So now what we'll do, we'll assign this request to the namespace, and the name, whatever we are creating inside the namespace, needs to follow the resource quotas. Okay. So if you see this, UCTL describe NS default. And here we can see something called no resource quota, no limit range resource. Basically, we haven't specified anything, right? So that's the reason we are unable to see anything over here. Okay, but we can mention the resource quota and limit range resources in our namespace, and everything which is getting created inside the namespace will be automatically applied for these restrictions. Okay, and then we can also create, sorry, we can also configure airbag. Airbag means role based access. Okay, so basically we can also provide different access to different roles, okay, for different namespaces. Okay, so that's how we are going to control our cluster, who can access, who can delete, who can manage. So this part we haven't seen it, so we'll discuss this at after some time. Okay, not today, might be tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Okay, so these are the different benefits of using our namespaces in our deployment. Okay, and then we have something called service DNS. Okay, so service DNS are also very important if you want to communicate between two pods in two different namespaces. Okay, so service DNS are very important if you want to communicate with two different pods in two different namespaces. Okay, so in Kubernetes, service DNS, also known as service discovery DNS. Okay, and this is a kind of mechanism that allows communication between services using their names instead of their IP addresses. Means earlier what we have seen in services, we were trying to access the services with the help of the IP address, right? So if you remember, we have created node pod and we have created our cluster IPs, right? So we were trying to access a node pod and cluster IP with the help of their IP address. But here we can also access them or communicate between the services based upon the service DNS. So by default, whenever we deploy any cluster, right? So it will also assign a DNS name. Okay, so which can be used to access our services. Okay, and the default name will be in terms of this syntax or this format. Okay, so initially it will be the service name, and then the namespace name, and then .svc .cluster.local. So this will be the DNS name. Okay, so we'll see how we can communicate between two ports in two different names. Okay, so for example, create one in default namespace and attach a node port service to it. So let me try to create one and then attach one node port service. Okay, so we have our YAML file, right? So let me just customize it, because by default this will get created in the namespace called third port. Sorry. Okay, so I have commented it. So kubectl apply -f first.yml. So what happened? So one pod has been created. kubectl get pods. Then we can, sorry, spelling mistake, kubectl get pod. Then we can see one pod is running in the default namespace. Okay. Now it's time for us to create one service with node pod. Okay. So if I do ls, so we have our node pod configured. I think I have my YAML file here. Okay, let me copy this. But I just want to check the labels, what we have configured. env equal to prod, and here also env equal to prod. Basically, this node pod service will be mapped to my container, sorry, pod. Okay, so let me create one more YAML, nodepod.yml. Okay, let me create this kubectl apply -f nodepod.yml. Okay, so if I'll do kubectl get services SPCs, sorry, SPC. Okay, we can see one node port service has been created, and this is exposed on port number 32,000, and this is being mapped to my pod called third pod. Okay, where HTTPD image is running. Okay, so let me try to access this on browser only to cross check. So any IP address is okay, right? So let me use public IP colon 32,000. Right. Okay, so our application is exposed to internet. Okay, now it is asking us to create one pod in custom namespace and try to log into container and curl. So basically what I have created is in the default namespace, so that is done. So now let me create one namespace called test and then create one pod inside my test namespace. Okay, so how to create namespace? Kubectl create namespace and then test, right? So if I'll do kubectl get ns, then we can see command not found because of the error. Okay, kubectl get ns, then we can see one test namespace is created. Now let me try to create my same pod. Okay, kubectl apply -f, then first.ml, and I want to create this in the test namespace. Okay, so this is also done. Now if I'll do get pods -n test, then we can see one pod is running. Okay, now once created, then connect to pod created in custom namespace. Okay, so let me try to connect to my pod. So how generally we can connect? Okay, so we can connect by using kubectl exec. Okay, and then namespace to which pod and which is in which namespace. So I want to connect to the pod which is in namespace called test. Okay, and then -it, and then the pod name third pod, and then bash. Okay, so what happened now? Root at the red third pod. Basically, I'm inside my test namespace pod. Okay, so once this is also done, okay, and then execute curl and then service name. So what will happen? For example, curl, and what was our service name? What we have created? First service. Okay, so let me copy this. Oh my God, curl is not found. This is which operating system? Oh yes, release Debian Red apt get install curl. I'm not sure whether this will work. Apt get. Let me update because curl is not available. So I need to install curl first. I'm trying to install update. Okay, and then let me install curl. Okay, curl is installed. Now if I'm trying to use curl, for example, let me clear this space. Okay, curl and then service name first service. Could not resolve host for service. Why? Because our service and the pod where I am are two different namespaces. But still, if you want to communicate, then we have one concept called service DNS. Okay, so by default, this will be get created with the help of this name syntax. Okay, so we have our namespace. Okay, so curl, and then this is our service name, and then dot. Okay, and then which namespace we have our service. Okay, that is in the default namespace. Okay, and dot, and if I hit enter, then we can see some response. We need to wait. What happened? This is not working. Basically, we should see the response. First service is the name dot default is the namespace dot svc dot cluster dot local. So this is all available. Let me come out of my container. Okay, command terminated with exit code. It seems kubectl get services. The first service is available and the type is notepad dot default. Yes, first service dot test dot svc dot cluster dot local is wrong and this was expected. Okay. So basically I should see that page. Okay. So whenever we create services, so instead of calling that service with the help of IP address only, so we can also call that service name with the help of service DNS. Okay. So the service DNS will be in terms of service name, and then this will be your namespace name, and this will be the default details. Okay. Dot svc dot cluster dot local. No response. Namespace, all the port numbers are open, everything is open in all the security groups. But still, service is also available. Let me exit, okay, kubectl, describe, let me describe my service. First service namespace is also default. This is okay. Environment equal to prod. We have one endpoint. This is our pod, which has been mapped. Okay, let me check this. Okay. Mm. Because this is working from IP. This is not valid.
Instead of IP, you can mention DNS name. I just checking chat, showing that use curl and DNS name and port number.
Sorry, instead of call.
No, the curl DNS name, column number.
Call DNS name and then
Port number.
this way. Service DNS. This is a format service name dot svc dot cluster dot local service name dot namespace name dot svc. This is also what I have used. This is still waiting only. I mean, either this is not responding as the wrong host name, but this is still trying to fetch some details. Okay, we'll see about the service DNS. So let me try to fix this. Okay, so let me read some documentation on this and try to fix this. Okay, so for now, let us ignore service DNS. Try if you can. Okay, try if this is working for you guys, and if working, then let me know as well. Okay, if not, then I will check and we'll get back to you on this. Okay, so if you leave this concept of service DNS, then we have something called resource quota in namespaces. Okay, so if I'll do kubectl, let me exit of my pod. Okay, kubectl get ns, and if I'll do kubectl describe ns and test, here as I have said, we can see as resource quota and no limit range resource. So what is this? So earlier in previous session, what we have did, we have added some kind of limits to our container. So this container should use 200 MB of RAM and 1 core of CPU. So similar thing we have in namespaces that we called as resource quota. So what we can do, we can assign everything inside that particular namespace will be consuming this much memory and this much of RAM only. Okay. So resource quota and Kubernetes help us to enforce resource limit on namespaces. Means we are trying to limit each pod. Okay, what should be the limit inside that namespace? So each and every time, instead of writing that inside our pod YAML file, so what we'll do, we'll configure that inside our namespaces only. Okay, so we can restrict our namespaces with certain CPU, memory, and storage. Again, in resource quota, we have two type of resource quota, that is resource based quotas and compute based quotas. In general terms as well, when we talk about resource based quotas, means any object which can be created inside the namespaces. Means we can create our pods, we can create services, we can create replica sets, persistent volume claims, and whatever other objects which are supported by namespaces which can be created inside the namespaces. On everything we can configure a kind of limit. Okay, in our case we are seeing pods, right? So we are continuously using to create pods and pods and pods, right? So what I will do, I will create one restriction on how many pods can be created inside my namespace. Okay, and one more thing we have is compute based quota. Means in compute based quota we are basically trying to restrict the CPU limits. the kind of hardware we can see. In object based, what we can try to restrict, we can try to restrict number of ports, number of services, and other stuff. Whatever is supposed to create inside the namespace, we can restrict them. Okay, so an example for object based quota is this is our resource quota YAML file. How can we write this? Basically, we can see this. Okay, kubectl explain resource quota, then we'll get the complete details. Okay, version, kind, and description fields. If you'll do -f recursive, then we'll get lot more of details. Okay, so we have one simple YAML file. So what I am doing here, if I'll copy this quota.yaml, okay, and if I'll paste this here, so this is our API version, this is kind, I don't think so this is required, I mean for explanation, and here inside the metadata, okay, so I'm specifying the name of my resource quota, what should be the resource quota, and the specifications, okay, how many pods it should get created only, means the namespace, how many pods should get created. Okay, so let me save this. If I like apply kubectl create -m quota.yaml -n, then test. Okay, so we have created this quota to a namespace called test. So if I do kubectl get kubectl describe namespace test, then we can see that number of resource quotas has been configured. So this is the name of my resource quota, what I have created, and inside this I have restricted to pods. So how many pods it should get created? Only two. As of now, one pod is available. Okay, so for example, if I'm trying to create one more pod, okay, for example, let me check this kubectl pods -f on kubectl pods -n test. Okay, so we have one pod, so let me create one more pod, pod.yaml. Pod name, let me modify to first. And the container name, let me modify as first container. Okay, now if I'll try to apply this kubectl create -f and then first.yaml. Okay, one more pod has been created. So if I'll describe this, the namespace here we can see used to and available also to. Okay, so how much we have limited to? As of now, we have two pods. So if I'll try to create one more pod now, so what will happen? So let me again modify my YAML file. Here I will configure this as second, and the namespace is already configured. That's the reason I'm not specifying the namespace again and again. Okay. Second container. Now if I'll try to apply, we should see the error because the quota has been exceeded. So we have already two pods which are running in our namespace. So if you want to add quotas to your services, that we can create that. If you want to add quotas to your replica sets or replica controllers or any other objects in Kubernetes, then we can restrict that in our namespace only. Okay, understood? So this kind of restriction we call as object-based quota. Okay, so compute based in general terms are also compute means a kind of power. I mean, it can be the CPU or hardware or memory. Okay, so object-based quotas is something what we can restrict how many pods can get created or how many services get created or how many replica sets or replica controllers can get created. Okay. So if you'll see about the compute based quotas, then this is what we can see. Okay, again here we are able to find the request CPUs, okay, and limit CPUs. So same thing what we have seen in our containers as well. There we have seen as request quotas and limit quota, right? So for namespace as well, we can see request.cpu and request.memory, limit.cpu, limit.memory. Okay, so let me try to do one thing. So before running this, let me delete my namespace because everything will get deleted, right? So kubectl delete ns test. Everything will get deleted, and then again I will create one more namespace with the same name called test. Okay, okay, now if you'll do kubectl get ports or describe ns test, nothing will be applied, okay, because this is a newly created namespace. Okay, so what happened now, we don't have anything inside this namespace called test. Now we'll talk about no limit range resources. Okay, so if let me copy this existing YAML file. So this is resource quota and this will be the same name here. Instead of objects, so I'm trying to configure the compute based limits. Okay, now vi, we have this quota YAML. So let me delete this. Okay, so whether we can configure this in terms of 0.5 or in terms of 500 as well. Okay, that's up to you in terms of milli cores as well as 500 or 0.5. Both are same. So we have multiple ways how we can set this limit. Okay, in terms of fractions or in terms of MB. So if I'll save this, now if I'll try to execute kubectl apply -f quota and then -n test, this should be executed in the namespace called test. Okay, one resource quota has been created. So if I'll describe this ns test, so what happened, see resource quotas we have seen, I mean earlier we have seen object based, now we are able to see the compute based. Okay, so this is the different type of limits which can be used. So out of this, as of now we don't have any, I mean this is 0 and available is 1. Okay, 1 core of cpu is available, limit memory is 1 GB, and the request what the user is trying to request is 500 MB. Okay, so now let me try to create one pod. So we already have this first.yaml, right? So what will happen, let us see. Okay, so kubectl apply -f and then first.yaml, and if I'll hit enter, then this should throw me an error, because error when creating first.yaml pod, second pod is forbidden, failed quota, my resource must specify limit. So what is happening, why this is getting failed? Because we have configured some limits to my namespace, and the same thing I need to configure inside my pod as well, means what should be the capacity of this pod. Okay, based upon this input, what it will do, it will try to schedule the pods in the namespace. Okay, so I need to mention the details, I mean what should be the limit for this pod, how much cpu it should use, what should be the memory. Okay, so or else this will not get work. Okay, so let me copy this. If I'll do first.yaml, okay, and if I'll try to execute this, okay, so if now let me just show you this. Okay, so here we can see data, we haven't configured any namespace name, right? Okay, I will pass manually. Here I am asking to assign the memory of 200 MB and the core of CPUs will be 0.1. Okay, the limits will be 0.5 and memory should be 500. So now if I try to execute cpl create or apply -f .ml -n test, API version is not set. There is some error in my YAML. our pod. This is v1, right? So let me execute. Okay, one pod has been created. Now if I'll do kubectl describe ns test, then we can see what happened. Let me execute this again. Kubectl describe ns and then test. Okay, then we can see 500 MB of is used out of 1 GB. Okay, 500 MB of is used out of 1 GB. So these are the different, I mean the capacity what the pods are being currently using and which is specified to our namespace. If this is exceeded beyond this, then what will happen? The pod will not get scheduled inside this namespace. Okay. So we can, this is how we can restrict our resource quotas. Either it can be the object based or it can be resource based. Okay. By default, if we are not specifying anything, what will happen? Then there will be no limit and the containers will use the capacity of our hardware. I mean, if we have 8 GB of RAM, then it will try to use till 8 GB if required. Okay. So this is how we can configure the resource quotas. And then we have one more thing called no limit range. Okay. So no limit range resources, basically as of now there are no limit range resources. And limit range, what is limit range resource? So let us see about that. Okay. Here we have some more detailed information about the limits. For example, what is mandatory out of this YAML file? Okay, so if I'll show you this. Okay, if I'll do cat first.yaml. Okay, if suppose I'm not configuring the limits, so what will happen? Is this mandatory to configure all the four? Okay, I mean the request quotas as well as the limit quotas. No. Okay, if you'll see this kubectl describe and then pod, the pod name is, what is my pod name? Test pod, and then -n from namespace test. Here we can see something called request and limits. Okay, so this is what we have mentioned in our YAML, right? So for example, let me copy my YAML. Let me create one more YAML. Okay, this time I will be creating in the default namespace only to show you this. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm trying to remove the limits. Okay, I haven't configured the limits. I have just configured the requesting. Okay, so if I try to execute my YAML file now, create -f second.yaml. See, one pod has been created, means without the limit request also we can create the pod. It is not mandatory to pass the limit resources request. Okay, but what will happen? If you see this kubectl describe pod text pod. So this is created in the default namespaces, right? So if I scroll up, so here we can see the only request details are being able to find. For example, let me delete this and try to create with the help of only limit. I will remove the requesting one. Okay, so what will happen? Second.yaml. Okay, let me copy this. Others, let me copy this YAML file. Okay, so I have removed the resources now. So let us see what will happen. kubectl, let me delete the existing one first. Delete pod, or else let me change the pod name. Can.yaml, right? So let me change the pod name. Instead of test, I will use as prod pod. Okay, and the container name also, let me change this. pod container. Okay, if I'll save this and if I'll try to execute this, what will happen? Let us see. Create -f and then second dot. Okay, pod is created means without passing either limit resources or the request resources, we can still create the pod. But when I'll check the describe it, so kubectl describe pod pod. Okay, if I scroll up here, if you see this, if we haven't configured the limit request, okay, I mean sorry, the resource request. So what happened? So by default, whatever was available in the limits has been assigned to the request as well. Okay, so if you want, you can pass the resource requesting or not. If not passing, then whatever is available, I mean the values which are available or which we have passed in the limits quota will be automatically assigned to the request quota as well. Okay, so this is how this will be working if we are not specifying any resource request over pods or our namespaces. Even for namespaces, that will be the same. Okay. Now we'll ignore all that stuff. So kubectl describe ns and then test. So here we have one thing left, that is no limit range. Okay, so let us see. It's been only 1 hour, right? Okay. So here, what is happening? If suppose, okay, so each and every time we need to add our resources to our YAML file. If you want to create any, I mean, if you have specified the resource limits, right? So if we have specified the resource limit, then what we need to do, we need to specify our resource quotas in our YAML file as well. So adding each and everything again and again, what will happen, that will be a kind of rework for us and it will be kind of headache for us, right? So that's the reason we have something called limit range in the Kubernetes namespaces. Okay, so what will happen, the limit range resources is Kubernetes allows you to define default and maximum resource limits for containers running within a namespace. It helps ensure resources fairness and prevent containers from consuming excessive resources. So basically what we'll do, we'll limit the range to our namespace, and this namespace will help us to manage our containers within the specified limits. Okay, for that again we have one more YAML file. Okay, here we can see as limit range as a kind, and the limits what should be the default value and to whom it should be assigned. Okay, so if I'll copy this for now, vi limit dot YAML, and then if I'll try to paste. Okay, so let me try to execute this. Okay, so kubectl apply fnf limit dot YAML. Okay, limit has been created. Now if I'll do describe my namespace, oh shit, yeah, I have applied this to the default namespace. Okay, so if I'll check, for example, describe namespace default, what happened, see, this is how we can limit to our namespaces. Okay, so now let me execute the same YAML file, but this time to the namespace called text. Okay, created. So if I'll do describe test, then we can see the resource limit. So now what we can do, no need to pass our resources inside our YAML file again and again, because this has the default requesting and the maximum limit. Okay, and here again we have something called minimum, maximum, and then max limit slash request per ratio. So what is this? So here we have again two components. One is related to our memory computes and one is related to our CPU. Okay. थोड़ा पानी देंगे ना. So here, previously what I have did, I haven't passed any limit over here, means default limit. So what I have passed is the only the requesting one, right? Yes, only the requesting one, and the same has been assigned to default request as well as to the default limit. So if you want to pass two different values, then we can use the default one, okay, and then the default request. Okay, so let me again modify my existing YAML and try to make the changes. Vi limit.yaml. Okay, so container, now let me try to kubectl apply -f limit -n test the configured. So if I'll do describe ns, then we can see two different values. Okay, the requesting will be 100 MB and the maximum default limit will be 200 MB. Okay, so this is how we can define our limits in our namespace. Okay, and then again we have something called minimum and maximum. So what will be the minimum and what will be the maximum values? Okay, while creating any container, what should be the minimum CPU that should be assigned? Okay, while creating any, I mean, what should be the maximum value again? Okay, so these things we can specify in the minimum and maximum values. Okay, so if I scroll down, minimum is used to allocate minimum amount of CPU and memory to a container, and maximum is to allocate maximum amount of CPU and memory to a container. Okay, but we need to make sure that minimum should be always lesser or equal to default request. Means this is our default, which is 100, right? So minimum should be always lesser than or equal to. It cannot be more than 100. So what will happen? The conflicts will get, I mean, we can see some conflicts. So what is happening is whenever we are trying to create one container inside the namespace, so we want the minimum default request as 100 MB. This is what we have configured. Okay, and if we are assigning the minimum value as more than 100, so what will happen then? It will not understand what needs to be done over here. Okay, so always make sure that minimum should be always lesser or equal to default request, and maximum should be always greater or equal to default limit. Okay, so if you see this YAML file, here we are mentioning minimum CPU as 200 MB and maximum CPU as 500 MB. Okay, so if I'll copy this, let me modify the existing YAML only. Okay, so the default request is, I mean, the max limit is 200, and the requesting will be 100 MB, and the minimum will be 100, and the maximum will be 500. Okay, and the type is the container. So if I'll save this, and if I'll try to apply again, apply -f limit.yaml. Sorry, I need to specify the namespace name. Okay, so if you'll see kubectl describe ns and namespace name, then what is happening? See, we have set this value. So what happened now? Whenever we are trying to create any container, then the minimum CPU which will be assigned will be 250 MB inside the namespace, and the maximum will be 700 MB. Okay, so for example, now let me try to create one container. So we have our first.yaml, right? I will not specify these details here because already we have configured this to our namespace. Okay, so let me remove these resources. Okay, let me save. And now let me try to cat and check if we have specified the namespace name. No, right? So let me execute kubectl apply -f and then first.yaml -n test. So let us see what will happen. Kubernetes another which is required. Okay, I think we already have some pods running, right? So see kubectl get pods -n test. So let me check if we have any pods. Yes, test pod is running. Okay, let me create one more. Let me change the pod name because already test pod is running, so it is not allowing us. So first.yaml And then instead of test pod, I will change this as prod pod. Okay, so production environment pods saved. Now if I try to execute this, sorry, apply. Hopefully this time this has been created. See, without passing any request, we were able to successfully create because we have already defined the store namespaces. Okay, here we have already defined. Okay, and this is the max limit. Okay, and here the current CPUs which are being in use, what we are using. Okay, so based upon this only, it will create our containers inside the namespaces. Okay, and then finally we have one more thing, that is maximum limit slash request. So limit by request. So what will happen in this case? So basically this will help us to fix a ratio between max limit and max request. Means if suppose the max limit or request ratio is set as 2. Okay, so what is happening? Our max limit is 1000 and max request is 100. For example, these values. Okay, this is 500. Okay, this is 100. So 500 divided by 100, what will happen? 5. So here we have set the limit as 2. So this will not allow. Basically, the max limit should be 200 if this equation should be valid. Then only this will create a pod for us, or else this will throw error. Okay. So if you see this, 100,000 by 100 equal to 10, value we have set is max 2, then it will not create the pod. Okay. So if you want to check, then we can check. Okay, so memory equal to 2. Now let me modify my limits. Okay, let me modify this. Okay, if I'm doing kubectl apply -f and the limit.yaml, I think I need to specify the namespace name. Okay, and if I'll do kubectl describe pod, sorry, describe ns and test. See what happened now? This limit has been set as 2. So while creating any container, if I passed as 100 by 50, sorry, 100 by 1000, then what will happen? So this will check for this ratio. If this ratio is okay, by basically minimum and maximum ratio should be below 2 or equal to 2. Then only this will allow, or else this will not allow to create any port for us. Okay, try to execute this. Okay, so try to check. So we have our containers. Okay, for example, let me copy this YAML and check this one as well. Okay, so 1000. So we have vi and then first.yaml. So let me delete this. Okay, instead of test pod, I need to change the name because already we have these pods, right? Okay, I'm just changing the name. Okay, here what we have said, we have the request as minimum as 100 and the maximum as 1000, right? So what will happen? 1000 by 100 equal to 10, and the ratio what we have configured is 2. So what will happen? This will not allow us to create our pod. -f first.yaml -n test. If I execute this, see error from server, error when creating first.yaml. What for forbidden memory max limit to required ratio per container is 2, but provided ratio is 10. So this will not allow. For example, if I make changes, so instead of 1000, instead of 500, so what I will do, I will do this as 500. So 500 by 1000 equal to 2, right? So this will be equal to 2, where our ratio will get satisfied. And let me execute this. Basically what is happening is we don't have that much limit as well. Okay, so kubectl delete pods -all -n test. Already we have some pods running, right? So we don't have that limit. So I have deleted that pods. Now if I try to create this request.cpu for fourth container. Okay, let me make some change. Here 100. Let me make this change as 200. Okay, now also the ratio will get satisfied. So if I try to execute this, forbidden, failed quota, my quota. Okay. If you see this kubectl describe ns test, here this is getting failed. Limits.cpu, this is what it is expecting because I have deleted all these details, right? So this is what it is expecting. I haven't passed it, so let me do one thing. Okay, kubectl get rq, kubectl get resource quota dot -n from the namespace test. Spelling, there should be no space. Yes, so we have one resource quota. So because of this, we are unable to create. So let me try to delete this resource quota. Okay, so how to delete this? kubectl delete resource quota, and then the resource quota name is my resource -qurt. Okay, deleted. Now there is no resource quotas to our namespace, so it will not be a problem. Now if I execute my pod, the only thing what I want to show is to check for this particular limit, okay, whether we are satisfying that limit or not. Okay, so if I hit enter, now you can see that pod has been created because the values what we have passed is equal to 2. Okay, so there are different ways how we can limit our namespaces, either by the minimum or maximum request or by configuring the resource request as well. So the resource limits as well. So either specify this. If you are specifying the resource quota, what will happen each and every time if you are creating the YAML files, we need to specify the details, these details. Okay, sorry, not these details, the limit of the CPU, the limit of the memory. Okay, for example, if you don't want to specify this, then use resource limits in namespaces. So either use any option, either resource quotas or resource limits. Okay, so I think we are good with this. So if you have any questions, then let me know, or else we can start working on this video again. Okay. So let me stop this recording.